come to this happy place, welcome.
Dead men tell no tale.
My siestas are getting shorter and shorter.
Disneyland is your land.
Come on, everybody. Here we go!
Welcome to the Magic Behind the Ears podcast with your host, owner of Theme Parkology, Jerry Cornell, and co-host, author of Discovering the Magic Kingdom, Joshua Schaefer.
Welcome, everyone, to another great episode of the Magic Behind the Ears podcast. I am your host, Jerry Cornell.
And I am your co-host, Joshua Schaefer, author of Discovering the Magic Kingdom. We are glad that you are joining us today and are thankful that you have been patiently waiting for the newest episode to come out. Our newest guest is Gina Rock. If you don't recognize her name, that's okay, because you'll recognize what she did for Disneyland.
Hello, Gina. How are you?
I'm doing great. I happen to be on a deployment. You're talking to me. I just got off work, and there has been several disasters this year, and I happen to be working one. So I am talking to you from a hotel room because I'm deployed right now.
All right. So you flew as Tinkerbell in Disneyland, but before that, how did you find out about your love for acrobatics?
As a youth, in my youth, my mother decided to put me into ballet at the age of 5. So I took ballet probably until I was about 11 or 12. But in the interim, my brother had been doing quite a bit of gymnastics. I became interested in gymnastics because I saw him doing it. So he started teaching me how to do handstands and cartwheels, and I started getting interested in acrobatics. And so I decided to combine the ballet and the gymnastics, and I think I knew I was going to be an aerialist from a very young age. I used to dream about running away with the circus. So when I was younger, I had, I believe, what they call a premonition. So I used to wonder about being an aerialist, and I did it, basically.
Wow. That's cool. Most of us just dream about running away with the circus, but you actually did that. That's kind of cool. What type of training did you have?
When I was I believe I was 16, I was doing tumbling in my high school. I was practicing for the gymnastics team and throwing flips and doing handstands and just flipping around like a gymnast. And some circus people walked in, and they were practicing a teeterboard act. And they saw me tumbling, and they approached me and said, "Hey, what do you think about trying this?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, I'd love to try it." And so I ended up trying it. It was very difficult and really scary. But I met Bob Yerkes, who has all the apparatuses in his backyard. Very famous stuntman and circus performer for many, many years. He's, I believe, 85 or 86, and Bob Yerkes is very well known in the community in the San Fernando Valley. He lives like Roscoe and White Oak area. And you can see the trapeze from if you drive down the street in Reseda, you can see all of the rigging from the street in his backyard, and it makes for curiosity. People stop and they're like, "Wow, what is that?" The guy has a circus in his backyard. So anyway, I live about a half a mile from him, and he invited me to come work out in his yard, where they were doing high falls and trapeze and aerial ballet and single trapeze and trampoline and just everything. So it was a dream for me to walk in there and meet stunt people and circus performers and famous people too. I mean, people like Lee Meriwether was there, and stars from the 70s. Tony Fonda, Jane Fonda. A lot of the stars were back there working out. And then Circus of the Stars, that started up back in the 80s. And I started training people for Circus of the Stars. And so that was part of what I did. So the training ended up to be a full-blown circus career, much to the dismay of my father and my mother. My father, a lot more conservative. He was a nuclear physicist and worked at Lockheed Martin. So, I think my mom's liberalism stemmed, just she had an open mind for us, all of us kids, to be able to be creative. My brother played cello, and my sister was an artist and still is to this day, and I was the athlete. So that's how that worked.
Did you enjoy working for the circus, and how many different circus companies did you work for?
I started out with Shrine Circus. My first invitation to join the circus, I was approached in the yard there at Bob Yerke's, and there was a gentleman looking for someone to join their act, and so I left for the Shrine Circus. That was back in 1974. I had just graduated from high school, I think about 6 months later. I went to the Shrine Circus, and I was working in a motorcycle act, and that's the kind of act where the motorcycle drives up the wire, and there's a trapeze underneath it. And they drive up the wire, and I am underneath balancing the motorcycle on the wire. So that was my first time. And then I had an offer to go ahead and try out for Ringling Brother Circus. They were about 250 miles away from where I was performing with the Shrine Circus. I had an affinity for hanging out with the clowns because I like to laugh. So I was hanging out with the clowns, and one of the clowns said, "Gina, Ringling Brothers is doing auditions. What do you think?" And I said, "Are you kidding? Let's go." So I jumped in his vehicle, and we drove 250 miles to an audition. And for the life of me, I cannot remember what town that was in. I don't believe it was in Florida. I do not remember where I auditioned. I just know that when I did audition, they were more than pleased that I had already trained on a trapeze, and I knew how to do aerial ballet. And from performing in Bob Yerke's backyard and learning all the different apparatuses, I already had quite a background. Even at the age of 17 and a half, 18, I had already performed in the motorcycle act. I had learned aerial ballet. I had already flown on a trapeze. So I had quite a bit of background, and they were more than happy to take me. So I signed up with Ringling Brothers in 1976 and 77. And that's when Gunther Gable-Williams was there. And it was great. I got to ride elephants. I was a showgirl. I was part of an act. Because of my motorcycle background with the aerial motorcycle act I worked, I was handpicked to work in an act at Ringling Brothers, which at that time in the 70s was unheard of for any showgirl to be able to work into an act. Yeah. So I made my debut working, as a true performer at Ringling Brothers in 1976 and 77, which to me was a great honor. I was fortunate to have the background. So that was the circus career, and actually the circus career stemmed out to Circus. I came back from Ringling Brothers in 1977, the end of 1977, I decided that a 2-year contract was enough for me. And I went back home and sort of hung out and wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and decided to jump in my car and drive to Vegas, which was only 350 miles away because I was a Valley girl. And I went to Circus, and a lot of the circus people knew me there already, and I was looking for a job. I just kind of, decided to keep my venture going, and as it so happened, there was an act that needed a girl to fly on the trapeze in Reno. So I went ahead and tried out for their troupe, and that was the Flying Ramos, and that was with the Flying Ramos. And I flew with the Flying Ramos at Circus for 3 years. But I continued with the circus aspect because I ended up doing a comedy juggling act, and then I did some MC work, and then I was actually in another motorcycle act. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that motorcycle where it's a big globe and the motorcycle goes in there and drives around inside the globe.
I love that.
Yeah, I was a girl standing in the middle hoping that I wouldn't get killed. Yes, that was...
That's funny. So, Gina, tell us about the story about you missing a train.
So I'm at Ringling Brothers, and I'm with some of the other gals, showgirls, and we decide the train is parked. I believe it's in Pennsylvania, and it's parked there, and we have so much time, like so many hours, to go out and do our shopping or do whatever we're going to do before the train leaves the station and goes to the next town, which is like 250 miles away. So we go out, we do some shopping, and we go to the movies, and we go back to the train, and the train is not there. The train was gone. So we're all just kind of looking at each other going, okay, now what do we do?
Better start running.
Well, and keep in mind now, we're all 19 years old. So there's 3 girls, 19 years old, that have now missed the Ringling Brothers train, and we're trying to figure out what to do. So I said, well, why don't we go back into town? And one of the gals actually said, well, we better go to the bank and try to figure out how we're going to get a ride to the next town. Well, we go to the bank, and it's like after hours. You can't get any money out of the bank. At that time, the ATMs were not alive and well, they weren't there. So we had no way to get money. And all of us are like down to our last penny because we've just been shopping, went to the movies. We have no money on us. So I said, okay, well, and we're all wearing shorts. We're all disheveled. We've been out running around all day long. And I said, okay, well, let's go in and kind of, let's clean ourselves up a little bit. And we went into the local Macy's and fixed our hair and our makeup, and that's the best we could do because we didn't have money for clothes. And I said, okay, me being the venturous one, said, let's go to the top of the Hilton and see if we can meet some people and see if we can get some help. I don't know where that got into my head, but it did. So we went to the top of the Hilton. Keep in mind, we're all wearing shorts. We look a little better because we fixed ourselves up, in the makeup department. But we walk in there, and of course, everybody's just looking at us because, we're young and we all look like we're in pretty good shape. So we had some negative attention we didn't need. But, of course, at that age, you're going to pretty much... that's going to happen anyway. So we were approached by the restaurant manager and asked us if we wanted to be seated to eat dinner, and we proceeded to tell him our story, that we basically missed our Ringling Brothers train and we're looking for some help. And the guy this manager just opened up the restaurant to us. He said, you gals just sit down here, you order whatever you want to eat, and we're going to figure this out. But for right now, because it's dark outside, he also called down to the hotel and got us a room. We had one room. They just helped us. So my idea worked. And then as the dinner went on and people started finding out in the restaurant who we were, we were approached by several different people, but this one gentleman approached us and said, look, what town are you going to? For the life of me, I can't remember. But I said, well, it was 250 miles. We knew that. And he said, well, I'm going in that direction. I'm a salesman. And then the restaurant manager comes over and goes, these are 19-year-old girls. You don't just put them in a car and take them anywhere. So he sat down with the gentleman and got his background. At the time, of course, people didn't do stuff like that, but this guy grilled him and found out that he was who he was and that he worked for a large company. And the guy invited us that he would take us. And so he drove us to the next town, and we literally walked in probably not even 20 minutes before the show. And we're still pretty disheveled, and so we jump into our costumes. Our makeup's not show makeup. We're just kind of looking like regular, no show makeup, just we are who we are. And it turned out, it just so happened to be that the lighting in this arena that we were working in was some of the brightest lights you'd ever seen in your life. And we're just, we were pretty embarrassed. But even though of course the audience wouldn't know, but we did. So we made it by the skin of our teeth, but we did make it. But much to the dismay of the company, they were pretty upset. But the show must go on, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. The show must go on. And that holds true to everything I've ever done in show business. It is the show must go on. It's no different than going to college as I am now. It's like, you know, you have homework, but you work 15 hours a day. Yeah, but the show must go on. It's the same analogy, right?
Yep.
So how did you get your career as Disney's Tinkerbell? How did that get started?
I worked in a circus in 1981. Bob Yerkes approached me and said, look, there's a troupe that is going to Taiwan. They're looking for a flyer, a female flyer for their trapeze act. I'm trying to think of the name of this troupe. I'm not sure. I think it was, the Redpaths. It was Michael Redpath, and he wanted me to join his act, and so I said, okay. It was it was called the Paul K Circus, and Paul K had circuses for many, many years. I'd never worked for him before, but it turned out that not only did I go to Taiwan, but I had an extensive conversation with Paul K, the owner, whose wife had been Tinkerbell. Judy Kay had been Tinkerbell. And I actually knew who Judy Kay was because when I was with Ringling Brothers and we played the Anaheim Convention Center, I can remember still like it was yesterday that she walked in. All of us are, in our costumes and doing our showgirl thing. And there was a lady that walked in, and we always looked for people that were guests that were watching us from the back curtains. And I'll never forget what she was wearing. She was wearing white knee-high boots, like the 70s thing, right? And a white hat. And she looked like a go-go girl, right? And everybody's whispering, and everybody knows who she is, and they're going, that's Tinkerbell. That's the girl that does Tinkerbell across the street at Disneyland. That's the lady who does it. And so everybody knew who she was, and I never forgot that. And so that was the first seed that was planted. When Judy Kay went to visit us at Ringling Brothers, and I'll never forget it. And so when I went to the show, and I was talking to him in Taiwan, I said, well, what is Judy still doing Tinkerbell? And he said, well, no, they took Tinkerbell out because they were building Fantasyland, and so she had to be removed because the tower was taken down. And I said, well, do you know when they're going to put her back? And he goes, no, I don't have any idea. I said, do you know anything? Like, can I find out anything from you about this? And he's like, wow, Gina, you're like really adamant about getting that job. And I said, yes, of course I'm adamant because I'm from the Valley and this would be the dream, to be Tinkerbell. That was my first inclination towards wanting to be Tinkerbell, although the inclination before that was in the other podcasts, and that's when I had a date for a grad night. You know how they do grad nights,
Yeah.
in June. So I had a date that was a senior who's graduating, and I went to Disneyland, and I saw Tinkerbell fly for my first time. So that was the first imprint that I had about Tinkerbell, and the second was, in sequence, that's how it worked. When I was 16, I saw her fly across the park and was totally enamored and thought that's something that I would love to do. And the second time was when Paul told me that Tinkerbell was not flying and probably will again. When I got back from Taiwan, my then soon-to-be husband, Richard Rock, we went over to Card Corner at Disneyland, and I inquired. Well, it just so happened they were going to put Tinkerbell back in 6 months. And
Wow.
I couldn't run home fast enough to get my stuff together and try to figure out how to hound, the talent booking office, which is what I did. So I gathered up my pictures, which were extensive. Pictures of me flying on the trapeze and riding elephants and swinging by my, hanging by my neck and my feet and, doing all this crazy stuff. And so anyway, I did get a call finally after hounding them that I wanted to know when auditions were, and I got asked to come into the office there at Disneyland, and I was armed with the pictures, and I was very small at the time, about 112 pounds. And Stan Freeze, who was the music director, was also the talent booking director. And we hit it off great, and he loved the pictures, and Richard had gone with me for the interview. And they had a lot of questions. Richard, of course, had flown with his brother and caught triples. He was a trapeze artist, not born into the business either. I met Richard in Bob Yerke's backyard, and he caught his brother on the trapeze. So he wasn't born into it either. So we had quite a bit in common. So anyway, we went to the office of Stan Freeze, and next thing I know, actually I didn't know. Let me take that back. It took Disneyland 2.5 months of researching my background, figuring out, in today's world, I have Homeland Security clearance. It was very much like that, although behind the scenes, I didn't know that. They were pretty much just checking out, my background, who I was. At that time, I was 28 years old, so I had started late in life, and next thing I know, I'm calling them every week. I hounded them.
Yeah, you wanted the job.
Yeah, I must have called the entertainment office no less than once a week for 2.5 months. And so finally, I get this call, and they tell me that I got it. And I was shell-shocked. I was stunned. I was so excited. I couldn't believe it. I'm getting chills thinking about it. And I found out that there was a couple of hundred girls that were vying for the job. It was very magical, for me.
Yeah. What was it like to fly over Disneyland? I'm sure you have plenty of stories to tell about the 21.5 years you spent flying across the castle.
Well, the very first flight I ever took was in the day. And I'm not going to tell you that I wasn't having a healthy fear, a healthy natural fear, because even though I had flown on the trapeze and pretty much, hung by my neck and slid down wires, there was nothing scarier than being 160 feet in the air, hanging by a wire off of a trolley, and being able to see how high you really are. It is a huge difference between 80 feet and 160. So I had a very healthy fear. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't nervous, because I could see everything. So it was really scary, my first flight in the middle of the day. So it was exciting and scary all at the same time. And
you actually fly through the night, right, during the fireworks segment?
Yeah, I only flew once a night. When I found out about the job, I did go to an orientation meeting, as everyone had to do, because we were all part of one big show. And I'm sure you guys have heard that when you first join Disneyland and become part of the show, as they call it, they have a little orientation about how everybody is part of one big show. And I thought that was awesome. I really liked that part of it because nobody was better than anybody else. Everybody was just one big show, all the way down to the street cleaners. We're all one big happy family that is there, for the people to enjoy the park. So I like that part, and I loved the part that I got to be anonymous. And nobody, when I went to the meeting for the orientation, when people found out what I was going to be doing, they got all excited, and they were like, oh no, how did you get that job? And what's your background? And I remember speaking in the orientation for quite a bit. And they just, they were floored. Wow, this girl got the job as Tinkerbell. And I'm like, yeah, and I know. And like, it's really exciting. And so that was kind of fun to be brought in and part of the park. But the best part about it is I only work 12 minutes a year. I mean, if you put all the minutes together, my flight was anywhere from 19 seconds to 26 seconds. And if you add all that together on a yearly basis, I worked about 12 minutes a year. And that was my mom who came up with that saying. Like, do you realize that you only work like 12 minutes a year? So.
Can you share with us the story of Frank Wells and Michael Eisner?
It's 1989. When I went to Disney Studios, I was invited to Disney Studios to fly across, I'm trying to think, it looked like a warehouse, a giant warehouse. And they said, okay, Gina, would you like to fly on a steel apparatus where you, Frank Wells, the vice president of Disney, and the president, Michael Eisner, and would you like to fly at a Disney stockholders meeting with these two? And I'm like, are you kidding? Yes, of course I would. And they said, well, it's at Disney Studios, so you just go ahead and head over to Disney Studios and we'll give you a dressing room, put your costume on, and you're going to fly down a wire across a Disney stockholders meeting over like 4,000 people. And I'm like, okay. That was pretty exciting. So I got there, and Frank Wells, who's kind of a daredevil, he loved to ski, and he liked to do dangerous things. Him and I went up there to get settled in to be hung from the frame. It was a frame that would hold 3 people to fly across this warehouse over all the people, that own stock in Disney. And Michael Eisner is looking up at me and Frank Wells and saying, I'm not going up there. No, this is up to you two to pull this off. So there's a fantastic picture of me and Frank Wells flying together across the stockholders meeting, and Michael Eisner looking up saying, I'm not going up there. So that's the Disney newsletter from 1989. So that was, and there is another thing that I forgot to tell you, Joshua, and that I played the Blue Fairy at an outside event. It was another Disney, it wasn't a convention, it was some kind of Disney annual meeting, and they needed the Blue Fairy to fly basically over the people that were gathering for this event. And so I actually had to be the Blue Fairy. Now here's the crazy part of this. So I get to this hotel, and I got to go up 9 stories, and I get hooked up to this rope, and I'm going to be dropped out of a hotel window as the Blue Fairy. Now, keep in mind, the Blue Fairy is a really big blue dress. You know the Blue Fairy, what it looks
like a
right?
gown. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm wearing this big, huge blue dress, and I've got the wig on, and these guys attach me to... They have almost... How do I think of it? They have like a pulley, and these guys are actually holding the rope, 2 ropes attached to me, and they're lowering me out of a 9-story window and lowering me down to the people at the event. So I do this, and it's kind of scary, not as scary as Tinkerbell, but I come to find out later that they almost dropped me.
Uh-oh!
Yeah, because they didn't have it on a spool. You know how you would normally have something on a spool and be able to use a crank and lower somebody, at an easy pace. Well, instead, they were doing it by hand.
Like letting the rope slide in their hands?
Right. And they said that they barely had me.
Oh.
And because with the, I wasn't very heavy, but the dress, and then I'm holding a wand. And so if you put all of the calculations together, you've got kind of a heavy object that you're lowering. I found this out later. I'm like, well, thank you for not dropping me. So I did get to play another character. And then actually that leads me into another story, because I actually played Peter Pan at an event. It was a shrine football game. Remember the guy who played the Leave It to Beaver guy? Yeah. So anyway, the Leave It to Beaver guy. So I got to play Peter Pan too. So I went off into other characters. But yes, I got to play a couple other characters too. So that was an East-West Shrine football game, and I was wearing a Peter Pan costume.
Could you also share the story about Tom Hanks?
So we're at Disney Studios. I've got my Tinkerbell costume on, and I'm walking over to the warehouse where I'm going to fly, and the meeting is, and there's Tom Hanks. And I was so excited. He goes, "Hey, Tinkerbell, how you doing?" He goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go fly around over a stockholders meeting." And he goes, "Oh, I'm going to go to that stockholders meeting. I guess I'm going to see you fly." And I said, "Well, it's really..." He came up and shook my hand, and he said, "Well, of course, I'm Tom Hanks." And I said, "Yes, I know." And I said, "It's graciously." I said, "Thank you so much for introducing yourself." And by the way, he does juggle. I don't know if you know.
Yeah. When did you meet him? What year?
1989. That's when you see the newsletter with me flying with Frank Wells and Michael Eisner.
Yeah, that was after he did Splash and Tom Hanks Big in the Money Pit.
So that was kind of fun. I'm not really a starstruck kind of person, but he always was one of my favorites. I mean, from day one. And plus, I knew that he knew how to juggle, so I thought that was awesome. So, and we didn't have a conversation. It was just sort of like hating, type of thing.
Yeah.
Can you also share the story about the time you got stuck on the wire?
Getting stuck on the wire. That's par for the course with this job. When they go to launch Tinkerbell, the crew, now that's a 5-man crew, 2 people at the landing, and usually 3 people where I begin the flight at the Matterhorn. And what they do is the trolley it's like a brake system. It's like brakes on your car. You can actually adjust the brakes on the trolley. And it takes a little bit of effort to learn how to do it, because if you turn any screw too far one way, that trolley can really go fast. So they have to be very careful when they did the adjustments on the brakes on the trolley. They had to really know what they were doing. Well, this one gentleman on this one night, I had a really heavy headwind. I think it was about 15 to 18 miles an hour, which meant they had to back off the brakes on the trolley. Now, I'm not talking about getting stuck right now. Now I'm talking about screaming down the wire. We're not talking about getting stuck. Anyway, I told him that I felt that the brakes needed to be backed off because I was going to get stuck if we didn't. Well, actually, the night before, that was the first night when we had to back off the brakes. Let's see. No, we had to tighten the brakes, I think, the night before. I'm trying to think what happened here. I remember that the brakes had to be adjusted the night before this happened. And I remember that they had adjusted the brakes to be backed off. And then the next night, I said, look, you need to adjust the brakes back to where they were. And they wouldn't do it. And as a result, I screamed down that wire that's normally anywhere safely going 26 to 30 seconds. I did an 18-second flight.
Did you actually scream going down the line?
No, but what I did do is before I had this thing where I would bark when I was approaching the mat, so they'd know where I was because it was kind of dark. I screamed real loudly about 20 feet because I was going really fast, and I let them know, hey, get ready, guys. Like I screamed out, get ready. And actually, it didn't work because I knocked them down. Because they didn't take my suggestion to tighten the brakes, that's what happened.
So they have a gigantic mattress at the end, right, to catch you?
Yeah, there's a gigantic mattress that they hold with two hands on either side, and they stop me. First they slow me down if I'm coming in fast, and then they ease it back. So I'm not really supposed to slam into that mat. But when I do, I'm supposed to turn my shoulder. And of course, with my aerial background, that's not hard. It wasn't hard for me to do because I had been an aerialist so many years. So, you would turn and bring your shoulder into the mat. But I knocked those guys down. And that was the first time that ever happened.
Your 112-pound self.
Yeah, so it was pretty scary, and from then on, when I told them I need an adjustment done, it was done. But this is where you have to be in really good family character with your crew. You have to be a crew. You have to be a team. You have to work as a team.
Did you have a Tinkerbell team, like a specific group of people?
Yeah, a specific group of people. These gentlemen that I worked with and ladies that I worked with, they all had regular, everyday jobs out of the park. One gal and her husband, I don't remember where she worked, but he was actually an airline steward. And he was an airline steward. We had another gentleman who worked for General Motors. We had another one that was an engineer, very much like what I'm trying to do right now. And another gentleman worked for a company where they made boxes. Everybody had a regular job, and they worked in a department called show services. And these were guys that worked in show services, and they were with me for all 21 years, all the same group. I mean, there were some that would come and go, or they'd be added or dropped, but the main staple of my crew, which was about 5 of them, were with me for the entire 21 years. And that was great because we all felt like family. It was nice. It was nice to be able to go to work and really know, who you were dealing with, especially with safety. Safety was a priority. If you're going to fly 160 feet in the air, you got to feel safe.
I understand you have 2 children. Did you ever take them to the park with you?
The kids went to the park with me all the time. I waited till they were both Austin and Jennifer were born on February 26th and 27th. I just happened to have my children right between seasons. How that happened, I'm not sure, but how that timing it was amazing that I was able to have my children and get back in my costume. I did not like leaving my children at home. I felt guilty that I worked at night and was not home with my kids. So when they turned, 5 and 7, I took them with me to work. I had a sitter that loved Disneyland, and they'd go off to work with me, and sometimes I would take them up to 3 times a week, 2 or 3 times a week. It was great. It's always like, Mom, are we there yet? Mom, are we there yet? Mom, are we there? So I used to, do the whole like, oh, are we there yet? And they knew how far it was, which was about an hour away. It was about 62 miles from where I lived. And they went with me quite a bit, and they still go to this day.
Wow.
Did you have another job at that time while you were doing Tinkerbell?
My other job, basically, I opened up a talent agency back in 1988. I opened up a small talent agency out of my home so I could stay at home and raise the kids. And, at that time, most of the women my age were stay-at-home parents. It wasn't, 2 people didn't have to work all the time. It was a whole different world back then in the 80s. And a lot of us women got to stay home and raise our children. And I developed something for me to do that I liked, and that was booking very talented people that were variety artists, like jugglers and magicians and stilt walkers and guys that juggle chainsaws and sword swallowers and little people as well. And I booked all kinds of variety talent for
Did
parties.
you do that for Disney?
Well, Disney approached me right about 1991 or 92. They found out I was booking variety entertainers, and they said, "Why are you not booking variety entertainers for us?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know you needed them." So they said, "Well, we have several corporate events that we would love to have your entertainers join us for different various performances that we would need them for, such as corporate events." I did a corporate event. Robin Williams, when he did his second Aladdin film, had a huge event for the opening. There was on these grounds, not sure, somewhere in the San Fernando Valley where it was stationed, there was about 5 acres worth of property that had to be fixed up with the theme of Aladdin. And I was asked to hire 30 performers that had something to do with an Aladdin type theme, such as fire eaters and sword swallowers and people that did balancing acts and still walkers and globe walkers, and it was great. So it was a themed event where I had my entertainers booked, and that was a large event that I did. And then when Disney owned the Queen Mary, I booked several variety entertainers for multiple performances over at the Queen Mary.
Wow.
So I did it for many, many years. I did it probably from 1991 till about 2000. And then right about then they were changing. There was a lot of management changes, and they decided to do a lot of in-house booking. They weren't using too many independent contractors. They decided to start booking within. So I wasn't booking as much talent for Disney at that point. At one point, I actually tried out for the entertainment management job, and I had not had any college, and they were looking for somebody that had a college background. So that didn't happen, but that would have been great. But at the time, I owned the talent agency, and I was booking a lot of talent, so I wasn't really available other than just doing Tinkerbell.
So after 21 and a half years, in the year 2005, Disney had its 50th anniversary, and they started training 3 new Tinkerbells to fly a different way, because they had the pulley system that would go back and forth and up and down now instead of a zip line. Did you have to do anything with that, or what happened when that started?
In about 2000, I think it was 2004. Now we had already It was Patty and I working, me and my sister-in-law. We were sharing the time as doing Tinkerbell. I did it the first 3 years myself. Then I brought her in, and then she started working half the time in about 1994. I was basically doing most of the nights, and then she started working half the time. And then they brought in a third, and I trained everybody that decided to join the troupe. 2004, they had a day where they said, hey, look, can you come in early? We want to train 3 girls. And I said, sure, no problem, and didn't want to train myself out of a job, but really didn't know what was up. I had heard rumors that they were going to put together a new show, and I assumed that that's what that was for. So I trained 3 girls how to fly. They hung in a warehouse. I showed them, basically the different positions that I used and how to balance. And I trained them in a warehouse. And then I went up there with them on the Matterhorn and watched them fly and made suggestions. And basically these were 3 of the girls that were going to be doing the new show. I had already decided that I was not going to have anything to do with moving on past 21 years. I thought that was a fantastic run, and I was very fortunate to work for the park as long as I did, and it was time to move on.
So, you moved on. What did you do after flying as Tinkerbell?
Well, that was my first time realizing that back in 2003, when I was still flying, I had realized that college was something that I was missing. And my daughter was going to college, and I went to college with her one day and landed into a physical geography class, and that's what really sent me into college. I just loved the physical geography. I took a liking to that department. I was actually going to be a sociologist. That was my interest from the time I was in high school. I worked with autistic children. I did it as a volunteer, and I worked as a candy striper when I was younger, and I also worked on a crisis hotline with my mother. And so I had an affinity for helping people. That had already been a huge part of my life. My mother was always helping folks. My mother worked with hospice patients. She's the one who taught me how to work with on the crisis hotline, encouraged me to be a candy striper. So it kind of melded into an offer. I met someone who was a disaster housing inspector for when disaster declarations happened, presidentially disaster declarations. And he said, hey, do you have any interest in trying to learn how to do this? And I said, well, sure, I'm getting ready to retire. Might be a good idea, and I'd like to travel. So I took the engineering classes. Basically, they were housing inspection classes. And at that time, we were wearing pagers, and I was just getting into a speech class. I'd been in college now a year and a half, basically going for my sociology major at that time. And I got a page, and sure enough, it was Hurricane Katrina. And that was my first job in 2005.
That's a big one.
Yep, they handed me a computer and said, here. And I went, okay, what do I do with it? So, I'm like, how do I plug it in? What do I do with this thing? I'm like, okay. So it's just amazing to me that I'm still sitting here to this day. I'm on a deployment as we speak. I won't mention what deployment, but we've had several flood events and there was a hurricane event, and I'm working one of those jobs right now. And it's been 12 years, and I've been to 30 states in 12 years.
So they're long days, long hours?
Yeah, my day is definitely not 12, anything remotely like 24 seconds or 12 minutes a year. We're talking, when you first get deployed, it's inundated with the people the applicants that are affected sign up right away. When there's a disaster declaration, they hope that FEMA's going to step in, and they do. And when that happens, you get a tremendous amount of people signing up. I mean, thousands. Hurricane Katrina, I think they took in, I don't know, probably 650,000 applications, maybe more. Most of these disaster declarations that are big have a tremendous influx of people signing up. So I'm working anywhere between 13 to 15-hour days.
Wow.
I'll put in like 90 hours in my first 3 weeks sometimes.
Oh my goodness. Are you thinking about a career change, or you want to keep doing that forever?
Well, I had never intended to do this for 12 years. That had never been my intention. I had fallen in sync with a significant other and traveled extensively with him for 7 years. And then I decided to go back to college. In 2010, I looked to going to college online, and I decided to get my emergency management degree because I fell enamored with with helping folks and being able to be a part of something greater than entertaining or booking people for a living and getting them jobs. You know, I was helping folks, and I think that's really been my upbringing from my mother. It's an innate trait that I have. So, you know, I fell enamored with the job, and like I said, I never planned on doing it this long, but now I've graduated with my emergency management public safety degree in 2015.
Wow.
And then had not planned on going further with college, but did very well, exited with a 3.98 average, almost a 4.0, and really loved college. I fell in love with it and loved to learn and broaden my horizon there. So then I decided to jump into my MBA with the college I was going to, and I didn't like it. It wasn't, I never had planned on being any kind of financial officer, so it wasn't a part of my disposition. And then I was pursued by USC, the University of Southern California, had a program called Geospatial Intelligence. And, you know, I say that word with trepidation because I didn't know what it was. I'm like, what is geospatial intelligence? And so, you know, I come to find out that this is GIS. And, you know, that's Geographic Information Systems, as we all know, is our Garmin's, and this is what gets us from, you know, point A to point B and mapping, and so GIS and geospatial intelligence it involves remote sensing. It involves the satellites that fly above us, 468 miles above the Earth, that sends down pictures of what's going on in our world. And, you know, as an analyst, you're able to interpret those pictures and help as a disaster emergency specialist, emergency manager, which is what I was headed for. You're able to gather up information that's vital for mitigating the community evacuation route, figuring out floodplain management, where the flooding has occurred, where it's occurring over and over again. You know, what can you do to mitigate the problems? Right now I'm taking a class in remote sensing where I'm learning about riparian buffers and, you know, how do you find the watersheds? How do you block off the watershed area runoffs? And, you know, how do you protect the community that's, you know, everything's cement and an impervious land surface, and where does the runoff go? It goes into their houses, you know. So I'm learning about this in college, and so that's where I'm headed. I'm headed into possibly being a GIS analyst. I'm not sure yet. My next class is the Intelligence Tradecraft program is next. I'm in my third, this will be coming into the end of my second semester, going into my third semester, which is a far cry from being Tinkerbell. Really
definitely.
far cry from being Tinkerbell.
So, on the side, you've been working with children while you go to these houses. What have you been doing with the children?
Back in 2012, I was in a house where I think it was a 5, 6, and 8-year-old that, well, I'm sure that you guys have experienced this sometimes, when children are small, they want to have the attention of the parents full time. And when somebody's trying to take their attention away, like them being on the phone or talking with someone else, children, have a tendency to want to vie for the attention of the parents. So, I realized that I was in an inspection and these children were not liking the fact that I was there and they wanted the attention. And so I gave it to them. I said to one of the children, I think the 7-year-old, I said, "Hey, do you have any crayons?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you have any paper?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Would you like to draw me a picture of what happened to your home, the flooding?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And so all 3 kids went and got their crayons and their paper, and they started drawing me the pictures of their houses being flooded and, trees falling in and water all over the place and people in boats that are not supposed to be there, because their house is now 3 feet of water and, they're surrounded by it. So I started collecting pictures and the children absolutely love it. I call it art therapy, disaster art therapy. These kids produce pictures that are just amazing. This is a chance for children to express their feelings about the hazard that occurred, and they get to express it on paper.
Yeah.
And the children they love it. It's a way for them to get their feelings out on paper, very much like any art therapist would have them do. And it started to just take off, and now I have 350 pictures. I have 4 books full of pictures. Probably I'm on my 5th one now. I'd like to publish it. I do have the copyright for the book. I'm not able to publish the book. By request of the firm that I work for, they've asked me not to publish it. They had me go through FEMA and send them the copy of the front of the book and a description of the collection process. And they decided that it could possibly be a privacy issue. So I have not been able to publish the book, which is such a shame because the children always ask me, where's my picture going to go? And I said, well, it's going to go in a book. And they said, well, will we get to see our pictures online? And I said, well, maybe someday they will. You will.
Yeah.
So I haven't been able to publish it.
Well, hopefully soon. Hopefully we can get that out there so people can see it. Because I've seen some of the pictures, and it's just amazing to see what the children have gone through and how they can transfer those feelings onto paper with crayons.
Well, it was actually not my thought to ever make it a book. When I went to Colorado, there was what they call 1,000-year flood because it really had been over, once you get over 500 years, it becomes a 1,000-year flood. They had this huge flood in Colorado, and there's many artists in Colorado. There's a big artist community there, and many of my applicants were either teachers or, some were art therapists, and some, just were enamored with what I was doing with the children and collecting these pictures. And this one teacher said to me, "Gina, this is amazing what you're doing for the children." She said, "Why don't you make this a book?" And I said, "Well, what would be the use?" And she said, "Well, teachers could use the book. When kids get into, when they experience a flood or tornado or any type of hazard, they can express their feelings through drawing pictures. And why don't you, maybe teachers would buy the book." And I said, "Well, that's a thought." So I gave it some thought, and now it was 2015 when I decided to finally do something with it. And my engineering firm that I work for requested that I write about the collection process, and that's what I did. And told them the story of the gal that suggested that I put the book together, and they made me, present it to FEMA, and that's when I got stopped. Hopefully, I'm still collecting pictures once in a while, when it's appropriate.
Well, fingers crossed that it works out. So, throw back to your time in Ringling Brothers. Recently, Ringling Brothers retired all of their elephants. And you used to ride on them back in the 70s. Like, how does that make you feel now that the elephants are going to live on a farm?
Well, first of all, I have an affinity for elephants. My father, who passed away at a very young age of 49, he had a massive heart attack. In fact, when I left for the Shrine Circus, I remember waving goodbye to my father, and that was the last time I would see him. He had a thing for elephants. He loved elephants. In fact, I had a recurring dream. It went on for probably 15 years that my father saw me riding that elephant backstage. And I haven't had the dream for several years, but I collect elephants. I have little elephants all over the place.
Aww.
Yeah, but elephants are wonderful creatures. I don't know if you know this, but African elephants and Indian elephants have a totally different temperament. African elephants have a tendency to be mean. Those are the elephants that have the very, very pointy ears, and the Indian elephants have the very round ears. That's how you can tell the difference. Well, I rode an Indian elephant that was just a wonderful, wonderful elephant. He got to know me. I would bring him loaves of bread and carrots before I would ride him. And he knew who I was, as soon as I would get in my costume and get anywhere near him, he'd like, okay, where's the food, so he got to know me.
Well, elephants never forget.
That's right. And so what a great experience that was. I'll never forget how terrifying it was to ride it the first time. I mean, it's like trying to get on a third floor of a building. I mean, this is how they teach you to ride an elephant. The elephant, you put your foot on their foot, and you grab the harness, and they throw you up on their back. And I'm not even going to tell you how scared I was the first time I had to do that. And the very first time I had to learn to ride an elephant was the day I found out that my father and my mother would not let me come home. My dad died in screaming pain in my brother's arms. It was a mess at home. She said, I want you to continue doing what you're doing. I said, you got to be kidding. And as a result, I actually ended up getting hurt because I couldn't think straight. I had a huge problem with my foot for many, many years and had to have a surgery 10 years later on it. But the elephants were the character of the elephant. They're just awesome creatures. They really are. I feel blessed that I got to learn how to ride them. Do I agree that they should have been in the circus? No, I mean, I think that animals need to be free. Gunther Gable-Williams was an extraordinary man that not only loved his animals, but he fed his animals. He would get up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, feed. He raised all the tigers himself from babies. Wow. He bottle fed the tigers. Am I saying that it was okay for those animals to be caged? No, absolutely not. I never agreed with it. I feel blessed that I was able to have a dialogue, if you will, with an elephant. That I got to be firsthand, got to not only ride them, but to get to know their character, and they're awesome. And I think it's wonderful that they're retired. I think it's great. I know that there's not a lot of animals in the circus anymore. They've pretty much taken the animals out of the circus. And even though that is the circus, I understand why they took them out.
Well, Gina, Joshua and I would like to thank you for being on this podcast. I mean, you are a fascinating person with a fascinating story. We had a great time listening to you and all your stories. I could just listen to you for hours. I mean, you seem to have like so many awesome stories. It's like every question leads into 2 or 3 different stories, and they're fascinating. You probably should write a book about your whole life story. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So I've been told, as you're sitting next to the writer there, and he happens to be my publicist.
There you go. There you go. Well, we want to thank you for being on the show. How can people get in contact with you to get maybe an autographed picture of you or to ask you a question or two?
Joshua Schaefer is your cohort there. Is
Me.
Basically, he is the person he's the person to get a hold of. He is taking care of my career, and anybody who wants to interview me would have to contact him.
If you would like to get an autographed photo of Gina, just visit my Etsy page at etsy.com/shop/DTMK Fantasy Pins. There are several photos there, so just look through and pick the one of the 4 that you would like. There are 2 of her flying across the castle as Tinkerbell, and 2 photos of her when she was in Ringling Brothers. If you have any questions for her, you can email me at disneyguides@yahoo.com.
Great. Well, thank you again, Gina, for being on the show with us. I really appreciate your time and your wonderful stories.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much for the interview, and thank you to my public relations manager for questioning me as he did, and
You're welcome.
I hope I get to do it again.
Absolutely. We definitely need to have a part 2, right, Joshua?
Well, speaking of again, if you had the opportunity, would you ever want to fly as Tinkerbell one more time?
Ooh, good question.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if they would let me go back to the park and fly one more time, that would be wonderful. I would love to do that.
That'd be kind of cool. Have a Tinkerbell from the past come back and fly for one night.
That would be awesome. Set it up.
If you would like more information on Theme Parkology, please visit my website at www.themeparkology.com.
And if you want to get a copy of my book, just visit discoveringthemagickingdom.com.
Thank you for listening to the Behind the Ears podcast with your hosts, Jerry Cornell and Joshua Schaefer. Theme song music montage was created by James Presley. All interviews were acquired by Theme Parkology. The Behind the Ears podcast is in no way affiliated with the Walt Disney Company in any way. All rights reserved for their respective owners.